Thank you, Pastor Eric and Erica, for the framing of these series. I think it's great to start with that humility. Eric shares a little bit about me, but I want to start by sharing a little more, because I know some of you, this might be the first time you actually heard me or talked to me. Being in the Brook for about almost 4 months officially. I was part of the staff in Brook in the suburbs at another church before joining the Brook, and I finished that job. I started the new job at Work Relief, got married to Pastor Jeremy, who's amazing. Not perfect, but amazing. Since then, I've been part of this family, and I really enjoy being amongst you guys. As Pastor Eric said, I'm from Venezuela. I migrated myself. Venezuela is a beautiful, beautiful country, very troubled country as well. And our story of coming here is one of miracles, one of God opening doors that normally people don't get to walk through, and blessing. But beyond that, I want to share a little bit of a story that not a lot of people get to hear. And it's the story of, I would say, the change of my own heart. When I first thought about coming to the U.S., it was very selfish. I wanted to come here because I wanted to go to an Ivy League university. I was going to get my master's and PhD, and I was going to become a diplomat and rule the world. That was kind of my dream. I'm just doing it plainly because you're family, right? I can be honest with you. I could Christianize it, but that was mainly the goal, to rule the world for Christ. So, after I came here, it came this process of waiting and applying for visas and finding a way. And part of being in a country that's falling apart is that some structures are not there. So when regular students apply for their visas in their countries and come ready to start their studies, I had to come here and go through a very tedious, lengthy, painful process for applying for a student visa, and had to postpone my studies because of that. And many things like that happened in the process. And through that journey where sometimes it felt like it was really hard, God kept reminding me of something that happened before I came here. And I want to share that with you. It was my church in Venezuela, where we were part of for many years. When we told them we were coming to the States, they said, "That's wonderful. God is truly opening a door for you guys. But we're going to do this God's way. And we're going to pray for you. And we're not just going to send you there and ask for God to bless you. We're going to ask God to make you a blessing for the place where you're going. Because you're going not just as people who got a work visa, potential students to learn and to accumulate and consume and be part of the American dream. You're going there as missionaries." And our pastor was very clear about this. And I thought I got it, but I didn't get it until it actually happened. And I think I remembered the words when the church was praying over us. And our pastor was saying, "God, we're sending you some of the people that we love the most. Some of the people that we train the most. But we know that you're sending them for a purpose. And you're taking them from us and sending them to America, because America needs people who love you. And we have a lot to take to America, but we also have a lot to teach to America." That was their attitude. And in that moment, I was like, that's great. But I don't think I got it until I actually was in the process, in the struggle, and trying to figure it out. What does that church setting really mean? In those years, in that almost 3 years of studying and waiting and trying to figure it out, that's where the scripture really hit me. And that's where today's big question for us to start this series is, what does migration in the Bible teach us about God? Because I feel like it was that really changed my heart. It was reading the Bible and seeing how God dealt with people like me that were feeling out of place, people who had accents, people whose names were changed from Angelica to Angelica so that others can pronounce it. No, I like Angelica. But it was when God dealt with people like that I realized, wow, God is really doing something deeper in my heart. And I hope that as we go through this time of sharing, that you could really get a hold on that heart of God and how He deals with migration. We're not really going to talk about maybe all of the questions of immigration, and I really will not be able to go through all the migration stories in the Bible, because if you look carefully, there's too many of them. But we're hopefully going to highlight some big themes. And I want to give you kind of like our plan of action, our game plan for today. We're going to do like an aerial view of the Bible, an overview of some main moments in which God used migration and how He sees migration and how He dealt with migration and who He is in these processes. And my hope is that you will see it from the top, but then this week, as you're alone and with God, you will go and do the pedestrian tour. Because the Sears Tower, I learned Chicagoans like to call it Sears Tower. Right? Yes. For that. The Sears Tower is not the same from the air that when you actually stand in front and whoa. So I'm going to give you a lot of passages. And I hope that throughout the week you will stand on them and whoa. Look at them. Okay? So, and you can also ask questions, so write them down because we're going to have an open mic time. But before that, let's just kind of warm up a little bit. I want you in your tables, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. And I want you to list as many biblical characters as you can who were immigrants. Name the place of origin and the destination. So it's a speed game, there's no wrong and right. I'm sorry, there are wrong answers. But it's not like getting a specific number by we're shooting for. It's kind of just start thinking. So go ahead, your 2 minutes
Your eyes
are
are
up.
spread.
I'm sorry, no hats for you. So there's no point in going now. I just want to hear from you. Can you shout like some of the names that you wrote down?
Daniel, Moses, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Paul, Jesus, John.
All right. I mean, she got them. What about the places of origin and the places of migration? Can one table tell me two characters where they were, where they originally were from, and where did they go to? Now it gets harder. Nobody?
Moses went from Egypt to outside of the promised land.
Okay. All right, that works. He did a little bit more than that, but that works. That works. All right. To the
He
hand.
said Ruth, Moab to Israel,
Okay.
and Jesus, heaven to earth.
Yes. Got it. You got it. I hope that was in the top of everybody's list. No, I'm just kidding. I think with this exercise, what I wanted you guys to grasp is that there's actually a lot of migration in the Bible. And I will argue that all of the characters in the Bible that we learn from, that we admire their faith, at some point they migrated. And if you actually think about it, migration in those times were not as comfortable as right now. People didn't jump into a nice plane with AC and go to a nice land and, got to customs. It was really hard. And God somewhat intended this to happen. So in our next slide, and kind of like the meat of this session, I want us to kind of unveil some of those processes. But just stay there in your minds thinking that a lot of the people you learn from in the Bible, the people who study, they're immigrants, they're refugees, they're asylum seekers, they're fleeing. Some actually go because they want to. Some are called. Like we are learning now about Amos, who went from the southern part of Judah to Israel to prophesy God's word. And then we talk about Jesus, who not only came from heaven to earth, but when he was a baby, had to be taken as a refugee to Egypt to be spared so that he will not be killed. So we see this thread in the Bible, and I think the main question that should come up in our heads, so what is God doing with all of this? Why God does this? It makes no sense sometimes that it's hard, even when you get all the comforts, even when you get a good welcoming in your place where you're going, the trip is still very dangerous and hard and complicated, and people feel it. I see it in my clients many times, and I know I told you that something shifted in my understanding, and I think I want to tell you before we jump into the next part of where I'm at right now, and where I'm at right now doesn't feel a lot like I'm doing many meaningful things in life many times. But what I am doing is that I'm walking with immigrants, specifically asylum seekers. That's my program, in helping them set up goals to try to think about what ways they can be more self-sufficient and understand the new context. I have people who have come to this country 2 months ago. That's the closest arrival was in June 27. So a lot of these people trying to navigate it gets really messy. I see these tensions. I see how immigration is really not pleasant. When sometimes you ask a question and people start bursting into tears because it reminds them of a really big trauma that they haven't dealt with. So keep that in mind as we continue into our next part. This is my favorite part because now we get to really talk about the meat of this. What is it that God's love is teaching us about migration? And I kind of want us to go with the storyline of the Bible. And we see that God's love, when He created the world, He called His people to migrate, to be a blessing. The first command He gives to Adam, I don't know if anybody here in the room can repeat it or tell it to everybody, yell it for us. To be fruitful and multiply, to subdue the earth, right? But if you think about this, He put Adam and Eve in a little garden. So He created this immense world. And He called them to fill the world, to subdue the world, which in intention is saying that He's commanding them to get out of their really comfortable, nice place and go through all that immense world and make it flourish for God's glory. So from the moment God created Adam and Eve, He made them to be immigrants, to go push to the next boundary for the blessing of the world, to expand the glory of God and the dominion of God throughout the earth. So many times we think about migration as a human thing. Well, I go because I have a thing. I go because I want education, or I go because I'm fleeing something really bad. But when we go to creation, we see that God mandated and God created migration for a good purpose of blessing. So like everything God created, we know it was tainted, twisted, bad things happen. And that's when I want us to, for a couple of minutes, just think about Babel. What happened in Babel? We find this story, you can write it down. It's one of those that you can look up in your week. It's in Genesis 11, 1-9. This one verse in verse 4 says that they did not want it to be scattered. They wanted to build this big city, be together, and they didn't want it to be scattered throughout the earth. And because they all spoke the same language, they were trying to coordinate to basically stay in their comfort area. What we see here is the pride of humanity in this story is refusing to go away, to go where God was calling humanity to go, to the ends of the world, to fill the earth. And because they didn't want it to do that, they wanted to stay kind of comfortable where they know everybody, where the resources are at. They wanted to build the city. God punished this by confusing their languages. So they had to obey. Basically, God was giving them the option to do it out of obedience. They refused that. God confused their languages, scattered them, and He still fulfilled His purpose. Why I share all of this is because we see here that God is merciful. So this is part of God's love. He could have destroyed humanity again. Remember, the story of the Bible comes right after the flood, where God already wipes out the earth because humans were so wicked. But in God's love, in His mercy, He chooses to find an alternative, confusing the languages, discarding people around because of language barriers. But at the same time, we see this tension on the human heart. We want to be where we're comfortable. Sometimes we don't like to go where God is wanting us to go. We don't want to obey these commands. It's a hard command, especially after the world, after there's toil in bringing the land to flourish, after there's toil in everything that comes to harvesting. Of course, it sounds comfortable to build a city and not have to go outside in the rest of the earth to fill it and subdue it and take dominion and be fruitful. But is that what God required of us? They saw the punishment of God because their disobedience and their pride are wanting to control God's ways. But then we see a contrary story in the same book of Genesis, and that's the call of Abraham. And I will give you again, write this one down if you want to read it, think about it as an immigrant in Genesis 12:1-3. God called up Abraham and he says, "You old man, 75 years old, with your wife, also an old woman, go from this blessed land where you're comfortable, where you have everything provided, where your family lives, and go to that land where all the people who worship idols go, live and abide. Go to the cursed land and live there, because I'm going to show you who I am." That sounds crazy. Especially if you're 75 years old. I'm not 75 years old, and I think about walking that in the desert and all the things and the turmoils and the things that can happen. And it's like, geez, then you know he had faith. Faith was obeying God's command to leave and go migrate and go in this journey. And yes, the risks were high. The troubles they faced were really big. He never abided in a house anymore. He continued to live in tents for the rest of his life. He never saw the promise. He never saw the big family that God was promising him. But he sought God in the journey. And it says in the Bible that the promise was that if he does this, he will become a blessing for the nations. So God called Abraham to migrate, to become a blessing to the nations. And indeed he was. Years after, we know how this wicked land was turned into the land of the people of God, the land of blessing. So there's some things to keep in our head, right? And when I think about this, then that moment in my life when our pastor was like, "We're going to pray for you. We're going to send you. And you're going to be a missionary." Now it makes more sense. Because even when I might feel sometimes like Abraham, like I have nothing to bring to reach America, just a poor student that speaks English with an accent, what can I bring? God says, "I'm calling you, go, because I'm going to do something with you. And I'm calling you for blessing." And I'm sure that all of us have a calling in our life where God is saying, "Go to be a blessing." Simmering in? We're good? Yeah. That was just Genesis, guys. Then we go to God moving his people around. God's love reveals himself in the migration journey. There's many stories to highlight to make this point, but I want to talk about only two that you all know, and I'm sure you do. One is Joseph. God takes this teenager who was trafficked to become a slave. God spared this kid, but he reveals himself in the process so sovereignly that he ends up being in the house of the Pharaoh, leading this wicked nation in prosperity so that these people can be spared. God revealed himself so sovereignly in this trip that even when he was in jail, in the lowest of places, God used him, spoke to him. He made him ruler almost of the jail to the point where when there was a right time, he put him in Pharaoh's house. It seems like God is absent in the story of Joseph. Actually, God's name is not mentioned in Joseph's story in many cases. Doesn't say the Lord did. His brothers sold him. Doesn't say God spoke to Joseph. You can read it for yourself. God's name is not really mentioned in the story. But God's hand is so tangent in the story that there's no way to deny that God is the one who's orchestrating all of this.
Amen.
And then the beautiful ending of the book of Genesis, of the story of Joseph, is him looking to his brothers and saying, "What you intended for evil, God used it for good." I'm thinking about all these little details, and it's just going to give you one more. The fact that his family was a shepherding family. If you look at the text, and I invite you again to stand in it and read it carefully. For the Egyptians, being shepherds was an abomination. That's the word in the Bible. Abomination. They hated shepherds. I don't want these people in my life. That was the door that allowed them to be able to actually move in Egypt and live in Egypt and be prosperous and eat the food of Joseph. If they had any other trade, any other work profession, they might not be wanted in Egypt. But at that time, being the least of these, being lowest, being shepherds, being a abomination, was perfectly what was needed. That's God's sovereign hand.
Mm-hmm.
God making a way even before we can try to make all these plans, and we will never make it. But God just orchestrated it perfectly. But then, when wickedness arises in this story, for 100 years past, the new Pharaoh forgets that the people of God came because of Joseph, forgets about Joseph's story. What happens is the Exodus. And what a wonderful picture the Exodus is of God's revealing himself in the journey. He doesn't abandon his people. He says in Exodus 3:7 to 10, in 3:7 to 10 is the whole process of this happening. But one passage, one verse here that I really want us to simmer in is God saying to Moses when he calls him in this chapter 3, I've seen the misery of my people. I have heard the cry, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So God's love, his concern about his people, calls a migration process. The migration process could have gone nicely if Pharaoh's heart was softened, but we know the story. Pharaoh's heart was really hard. He didn't want the people to go. So what happened were the plagues until he had softened and allowed his people to go. God just, when Moses first came, he just said, let my people go to worship. Not even to migrate, to worship. But then we see the whole story. Now it's easy for us to be like, oh, that was all God's hand. Like he was just being sovereign. But imagine in the moment, as a slave, seeing that your only hope to go worship God is being taken away from you, and your shifts are doubled up. And then there's this drama and this tension where it seems like there's no way out. But at the end of the story, what we get is this miraculous liberation that doesn't end with them leaving Egypt. It continues through the desert. And we get the opening of the Red Sea, the water coming out of the rock, the manna flow coming out of heaven. There's like so many miraculous ways that God provides and protects his people in the journey. It's not just the fact that God causes migration to spare his people, but God protects his people through the journey. And one of my favorite things in the Bible is when God sends the cloud during the day and then the fire during the night. It's like he knows all the details. He knows the in and out. He knows desert is really, really hard in daytime because the heat kind of scorches you. So he sends the cloud. But then it is really, really, really cold. And if you're a slave and you're walking with old sandals and your wrenched clothes, you don't have a coat for the night and a nice summer dry fit outfit for the day. You need the cloud and you need the fire. Because otherwise you'll die of heat or die of cold. Or both. Man, when I think about this, it just really reminds me of some of my clients. I have clients that have walked immense amount of land to get to this country, to give their kids an opportunity to not be killed. And one of my clients, Jeremy, and I were together. He was showing us a video of another lady that died in the middle of the Amazonian forest when he was trekking from Ecuador to Panama to try to get to his way to the southern border to cross legally and to present himself to the officers in the border. He was showing us this video, and I was just like, this is crazy. We have this woman, he's saying that this woman just, boom, died. And they think she got a disease and they don't know what happened. And I asked them, like, what did you eat? What did you eat when you were walking from Brazil to Mexico for 11 months. And they're like, whatever we found on the trees. What did your 14-year-old baby eat? Whatever we found on the streets. And it's like, wow, God really cared for these people. And I remember sitting there, and we were like shocked that, he's showing us this video. And I just told him, hey, fue Dios. He speaks Portuguese, I speak Spanish, we kind of understand each other, but his real mother tongue is Lingala, it's complicated, but I'm like, fue Dios. And he's like, yeah, Dios. Dios. He got us here, Dios. He knows that God, only God, could protect somebody in a journey like that. Wow. Take a deep breath. It's only Exodus, guys. We have a lot of books to cover now. But I promise I'm going to try to go a little quicker now. God's love also uses migration to judge and transform. We see this really, really tangibly in the story of the exiles. You can read anywhere from Chronicles and Kings to the prophets, almost to the end, and get some sense of what was happening in this season. But I want to highlight a couple of things in Jeremiah 29. That's the key anchor verse. Write it down there so you can read it at home. In Jeremiah 29, the prophet is writing to those that were already taken in exile. This is people that, again, were trafficked. They were taken out of their land. They were brought to Babylon. They were given Babylonian names. They were taken their houses, everything probably. The families were killed as well. And they were put to serve the empire that just has conquered them. And in this setting of a lot of tension and injustice, God is telling his people, don't worry, build houses, plant gardens, marry, and just live your life. Because the prosperity of this empire is going to bring into your own prosperity. And it's crazy. I don't know if you ever really simmer in the idea of being conquered by an empire and then having to serve them and wanting the empire to do well. I will not be happy with the empire. I know my own heart. I know I will be raged, and I will try to find a guerrilla group or something to do something against the empire that just killed my family and took my name. But God tells them, no, wait, because in these 70 years that you will be in this place, I'm gonna purify my people, and you, the remnant, are gonna come back, and you're gonna see me in a way that you never saw me. And this verse that we all know and we all quote and we all love, where God says, if you seek me, you will find me, and if you seek me with all of your heart. And this verse that we all love, where God says, I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope. These verses that we all love, that my everlast, I always love you, forever love you. All of these verses are in the context of, but now leaving the empire. Now serve them. For 70 years. For 70 years, I'm going to purify you. And we can see that this God's plan actually worked out. Because we have the book of Daniel. And there we read the stories of those that were in that scenario, in that tension, and how God purified them. How 15, 14-year-old teenagers had that conviction to say, we're not going to eat that food, we're not going to worship that God, we're going to go to the fire to prove that our God is our God. It was a time of intense purification and transformation for God's people. A time to look back to, but a time that was really hard. And the land of Israel, if you wonder what happened to the land, God said it was going to be destroyed. In Jeremiah 29, God tells to those who are in exile, you're good because I took you and I exiled you. The land is going to be destroyed. And everybody who stayed in the land, they're not going to be prosperous. They're going to be killed. And that's exactly what happened. We know from history that at that time, everything was ravaged, everything was taken away, and only those that were exiled were the ones that were able to return and rebuild in the future of Israel. So sometimes these things that look like this is not right, God somehow has a way to use that to make it right, to make us right. And he didn't say, I'm using Nebuchadnezzar because he's good. If you read well Jeremiah 29, he says, I'm using him, but I'm also going to judge him. Watch out, because he's not a good king. But I'm using him. He's my tool right now to cause the judgment. He's my tool to make my plan go forward. So again, we continue to see God's sovereignty, that every movement that he caused is for a purpose. And some of those movements will not be to our delight, but they end up being to our good. Right? This is my favorite part. There's no way to overemphasize this. And it's the fact that God's love turned himself into an immigrant to reach us. So yeah, you guys were great. I know you're whispering. You got it. Jesus is the miracle of incarnation. He's the most powerful migration process that we could ever think about. It says in Philippians that God, and I want to read it to you in the Message translation because I thought it was really cool. It says like this, Philippians 2, 5-8. You can write it down, read it again, memorize it, study it. Think of yourself the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had the equal status with God, but he didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of the status. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privilege of deity and took the status of a slave, becoming human. Having become human, he stayed human, which is also really powerful. It was an incredible, humbling process. He didn't claim his special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life, and then he died selfless and obedient death, the worst kind of death, and that is the crucifixion. So thinking about losing status and obedience and what God requires of us, Jesus portrays the best example. And I want us to think about this really in the frame of God's love, because that's the only way that we can understand why will God do something as crazy as that. He says, John 3:16, that for God so loved the world that he gave his son. He gave his son, he sacrificed it, he went the extra mile, he migrated, he caused all of this because he loved the world. Not because he loved the saved ones or the ones that bring offerings or the ones that have it all together. So what we see in this snapshot of history in our redemptive story is that the greatest migration process in the history of humanity, one-time event, was caused because of the love of God and through the love of God and for the purpose of connecting us in our relationship back to God. So if you can ever think about a migration process and be like, what's the ultimate purpose of all of this? You can be sure that you will be saved if you say, is to connect people back to God. Somewhat in the mix is always to end up connecting people to God. Then you read things as also John 1:14, where another passage you can read. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but God saying that he tabernacled among his people. He not just migrated to humanity, he migrated to a very specific, particular moment of humanity that makes it even more amazingly incredible. That he will desire to be a poor baby in Nazareth, Jew, a refugee, have no place to put his head on. Like, he doesn't just migrate it once. He continued to travel throughout the land to preach the gospel. He thought that was the way. And then when he went and ascended, what was the Great Commission? You can go. Albert, please with me. Go and make disciples of all nations. The all nations require you to go to them. He was going to say, stay safe and put together comfortably until nations come and kind of preach to them. Go to all nations. That leads us to our fifth moment in the history of redemption, where the church starts and where God sends the church. And the church is called to carry on this idea of we're going to take the gospel wherever it needs to go. And where before migration was really like, I don't want to do it, I'm struggling about it. We see in the church that people just went, had no fear, or sometimes had legitimate fears, but overcame those fears to just go and preach the gospel. The whole book of Acts will be a highlight for this. But I want us to stop in one place. So write this one down. Acts 8. What we see in the book of Acts till this moment, Jesus migrated back again to heaven, which is also as miraculous as Jesus coming back. Is Jesus going back up to heaven? Think about that. Nobody else has done that. And we will do that. That's the promise.
Amen.
So it's the firstborn. We're following that migration path. Jesus ascended, chapter 1. Chapter 2, a migration process happened, people coming to the land. God used that to birth the church. Things happened, the church trying to get organized. In chapter 8, what we see is Philip being asked to be moved to a place because of persecution. Something that started really, really, really bad, persecution, caused the church to be birthed. If the Jerusalem church was not persecuted, if Stephen would have not died, we might never have the church the way we know it now. In Acts chapter 8. And then it becomes even crazier because there's this one moment where Philip and an eunuch from Ethiopia meet. And then the gospel, we know for our archaeology records that the gospel is planted in Ethiopia. And the church is birthed there. And that church has stayed somewhat faithful through the years. So there's all these movements. All these movements. And lastly, I'm not going to read it. You read it and think about this. We are also on a spiritual journey to our home, to our new creation, our heavenly home. And that also should shape the way we think about migration. Some couple of passages that you can look in your spare time this week. Hebrews 13, Hebrews 11. Look at what faith meant in the context of waiting for this migration process, of being sojourners in the land. Look at 1 Peter 2, 11, 12, where Peter says to people, don't be like everybody else in the world. Don't behave like them. You don't belong to the world. You belong, your citizenship is in heaven. Though you might be in this earth, you belong there. And we're migrating there. So I hope that after all of this, something stays in your head, and is that really God has a purpose. And God has an intention for every migration process. He doesn't waste any time. And even those parts in the migration process that seem completely unfair, that are completely unjust, that are not right, God used them for good. And then those things that are intended and obedient steps, God bless them even more. So either way, it's kind of like a win-win. Migration can be a blessing. We know in our culture we don't necessarily see it that way. And that's on Jeremy to explain next week. But stay there for a moment. And really, I encourage you to go back to those verses, pick some, and study them. Now, I'm just going to ask Eric if we'll move on to discussion questions. Yes? Okay, just checking. I'm going to give you a time to reflect now, because I know I gave you a lot. And as much as I wish you remember every single detail I mentioned, I know that's not going to happen. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I know you will not be able to go through all these questions, but in the 10 minutes that you have, pick some and discuss it. We are going to try to, with all these new framework and lenses that I gave you, read this passage in the book of Leviticus. Think about what part in the process this book is at. And meditate as a table on the questions. Okay?
So
wow, you
when I
guys
came
are
back
way
to
better
the
now than
tree,
last
I
time. Coming back to me. That's an improvement. Now, before we transition kind of like out of these topic. I know you probably were getting to the really nice part of your conversation. It doesn't have to end now. You can continue to ask these questions, continue to talk about it, continue to meet up and answer some of these things. That's what we intend discussion questions to be, to not be a quick fix answer, but to actually invite you to continue to look into the text and doing this together. Because it's in community that God will bring the greatest revelations when it comes to migration and otherness. Before, we're about to go to a Q&A time, but I just want to reinstate with all of what we did, what was our answer? I know for some of you it's like, okay, land the plane. I'm that type of person. So I'm going to land the plane for you guys that are like that. Our answer, short and sweet, is that when we look at the Bible teaches that God orchestrates migration for blessing. Somehow in the middle, every movement of people is intended to be a blessing. If it's not a blessing, there's other reasons behind that. Why is that not a blessing? That do not point or question the goodness of God. Also, God is sovereign over all movements of people. There's always happen in the overall will of God. Therefore, because God is sovereign, we also see that God cares about migrants. And this is one of the passages that show the way God cared about migrants in the times of the settlement of the people of Israel. When they were probably about to get more prideful and be like, yeah, we're the people of God. We got into the land. It's us and nobody else. God is like, wait a minute. This is how you're going to care for migrants. And there's more. If you're reading the book of Leviticus, there's actually very specific policies and practices that God wanted the people of Israel to follow in order to invite foreigners to live among their life. Some of those had to do with how to make sure they're actually following God and not leading you to idolatry, but most of these had to do with how to care for them when they're going home. So go read them. But this also has an implication. It doesn't end with God. It comes because God is that God whose love causes action. God's love causes us as His church to go in action. So we are called to be like Him. And this is the oh my gosh question. What do I do with this? I think this is where God is inviting us to ask Him, how do we participate in this? How do we better reflect this in your life? I know you might say, well, you work for World Relief, of course you have to do that. But I'm pretty sure God has in His heart already a way that He wants you to consider these words. But we have to be open and let Him do it. So now I'm going to put an unshameful plug, and hopefully this will be okay with Pastor Eric. I know it's okay with my husband, man.
Somebody's job might be on the line.
If you're wondering what can you do, or even if there is, and you feel like God is calling you to be more connected with immigrant populations, to learn from them, to serve them. World Relief is also a Christian evangelical agency. It's the only evangelical resettlement agency in the country. And we love to have volunteers who love Christ, who will disciple our clients, who will teach them the Bible, who will meet with them and walk with them and take them to appointments and use that as an excuse to pray for them, who will mentor them and open the Bible with them. And sometimes case workers that meet our hours of work with our clients allow us for a lot of room on that. We always do it, but it's not in the schedule. But that's why we invite the churches to volunteer with us. And we only take church volunteers. We're doing an info session next Saturday. You can ask me more about it, about how you can volunteer for a long term. It's basically a 2-hour commitment per person, per week, over a span of 4 months. So you will be paired with a refugee or asylum seeker, asylee, and you will be working with that one person or one family for a 4-month period. You want to know more about it? Let me know. We can talk more. It's next Saturday. And now we can do the fun part, open mic. You can ask some questions if you want to, we have a couple of minutes for that. There's a mic in the middle, so come share your question or comment. I will have to repeat it after because we want to record it, and then I'll do my best to answer, and if not, I'll give the look, and somebody else will answer.
Do I have to use a microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we approach what God calls us to in terms of loving immigrants?
Mhm.
Whereas there's those that want the laws of the land abided in terms of immigrants coming in illegally.
Mhm.
Like, what does that look like? Is it love them from you on that side of the fence, here's some food or here's some funds? Or is it come into the land and we're going to love you how Christ calls you to be loved? Because, I mean, I know this is like politics, right? But it's a question that's like a constant battle.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Rachel. I'm going to repeat the question for the mic purposes. If I'm doing a good job, I understood that your question was, how do we love our neighbor as God calls us, and also kind of deal with the tension of abiding with the rules of the land, and do we love them in this side of the land or in that side of the land? I think as a really quick answer, the questions about love go beyond the issues of policy that we see right now. So this is a mandate that is not linked to a policy question. And I'm not saying that policies are wrong or right. Policies must be discussed. And policies, I know in the next session we're going to go a little bit more in depth of where policies come from and how policies can be fair or unfair or godly or ungodly. But for now, I think it is good for us as Christians to really define who is our neighbor. And maybe as yeah, no worries. Who is our neighbor? And I can tell you as Angelica, right now my immediate neighbor might not be the person in the other side of the southern border trying to cross this way, and there might be little that I can do for that person. I can pray for my country. I can advocate for things to move in a loving direction and a fair direction. But there's little I can do for that person on the other side of the border. But you don't need to go to the border to find immigrants to love, right? There's immigrants to love right when we cross the street, in the school, in probably your neighborhood, as in our neighborhood. Like literally everybody in any other house is an immigrant. So when it comes to who's our neighbor, I think Jesus is really calling us to our immediate neighbor. And if every Christian takes this to heart, it will look very different. Like I can share with you some resources that talk about the churches in the border and how they see their calling as loving their neighbors in that tense situation. But the Brook is not in the border. So we cannot do what they do. But we need to think about, and we need to come as a community of faith. And I know Pastor Eric will address this also in the last talk. We need to think about how we love them here, the ones that are here, and our neighbor here. And it's a matter of not asking for requirements before I love you. It's not, okay, are you here documented? Can I see your visa status? Now I can love you, or I cannot love you. And sometimes love is helping people figure it out that. At least that's how it looks like for Angelica and World Relief. A lot of people don't even know what is the requirement of the law calling them. So a lot of my job is sitting down, okay, you came in this way and you're an asylum seeker, let's go meet an attorney and let's find a way to make this as it has to be. And if your attorney says you cannot work for 6 months, it breaks my heart, but you cannot work for 6 months, that's the law. And we are going to abide by it so that you're right. That's loving, to try to help people navigate. But we have to know why people don't do that too. That was a longer answer than expected. Any other questions,
So
follow-ups?
I do, so I'm not a Brook member. So
Yeah,
I
no
thought
worries.
this was because of everything that's going on in our country, and I assumed it was about illegal immigration.
Mhm.
So that's why she asked that, because I don't know what to do with that.
Okay.
You know, I have immigrants in my class, some are legal, some are illegal. I don't really care, because I'm a teacher, so they're just a kid in my classroom. And I'm glad I'm not someone making policy, but how do I do that when we are called to be subject to the authorities, because God put them in place. And so I don't know, so I don't deal in that, but I don't have an answer for that either. So I like that, it's like we love whoever's in front of us without requiring anything of them. And that I can get, but this other stuff, yeah, I don't know. So I just, that's where this came from. And I don't know if we will get to that, because I'm glad I don't deal with that, but some people have to, and we have to make choices in when we vote. Who are we gonna put in place for this? I'm thinking, long term.
Great. That's I think part of the purpose of giving you a biblical framework and a biblical perspective is for everybody in this room to start thinking about that biblically. Not only say, what makes me feel more comfortable where I vote, or what's the party that I always vote for, or but what's the policy that sounds appealing to me. But looking at the Bible and God's heart, how can we get closer? Or not. And also, there is a point where we need to realize that the authorities of this world will never align fully, perfectly with the Word of God. No authority has done that. And if they claim to do that, they're lying words. So we always have to look at all policy critically. And I think it's very depends on your specific calling, like where you are at, will also determine how can you help or not help illegal immigrants, as they call them. Let's remember that immigration didn't become illegal until the 70s. It was in the 70s where immigration was criminalized in the United States. Before that, it wasn't. Now it's a crime to cross the border without documents or to overstay your visa. Most people think that illegal undocumented immigrants are those who cross the border, but most of undocumented immigrants are those who came with a rightful status and stayed in the country for longer than they had to for different reasons. Every case is different, but so undocumented immigrants did not become illegal immigrants until the 70s. And there was a policy reason behind why that happened. And there's also a really tense tug of war on how to respond to that. Our intention is not to say, this is how you have to vote, or because that would be too simple. We want you to think about this and struggle with this individually. If you want to talk more about how we deal with this in more relief, I can talk about that. I'm pretty sure in the other sessions we'll deal a little closer and put ourselves a little closer to that tension. But I don't think the intention is to say, well, this is the 3 steps of how you deal with an illegal immigrant when they come to you. So the steps.
Can I say something to that?
Yes, of course.
Sister, I think that's a great question. Just real briefly, that's why we ask you to come back next week. But this week is so important because you can't know what to do until you know the truth of God's word. And so many times, as she said, I just want to reiterate, we start in our culture with politics, with our feelings, but oftentimes, there's data that shows we don't start with Bible. And I think if we're gonna learn what to do and how that applies, which might look very different from many of us, we need to start with what is God's heart on the matter, and then now we can start thinking more critically about, okay, what do we do about what God's heart is on the matter? So that's kind of strategic for us this week to kind of say, let's just look at the Bible, and then next week we'll do the gritty stuff. Yeah. So that's a shameless plug to come next week.
And bring 2 people with you.
Who are willing to go on the retreat.
That's right. For a hat.
Are we supposed to go to the mic for questions? Is that the idea?
Yes.
I think we have one last question, but we have 2 people wanting to ask. Okay, let's take
2 last questions, and then
Okay, you guys, you go ahead. Hey,
Okay.
you're almost there.
Since the talk today is about the Bible,
Yes.
I work with a lot of white churches that often have Bible ways of justifying their way of thinking. So tonight we talked about the love image for sojourners, but many times in the Old Testament, you mentioned it earlier, there's specific instructions for the sojourner to be circumcised so that they would be a part of the people. So the people are reminded, love the sojourner as a native. Well, the sojourner had to circumcise first. There are a lot of white churches that would say, you got to be American before I love you. Right? And they justify it by way of that instruction in Scripture. There's the intermarriage laws about not intermarrying with people of other races or ethnicities. White people will use that to justify their way of thinking. And this happens in churches that I part of all the time. The last one, the one that was most recently presented to me, was, yeah, there's passages about loving the neighbor, but the people of Israel, these are all Old Testament arguments, right? But the idea is the people of Israel were called also to crush certain nations. So certain people were brought in, other people, entire towns, children, and all were killed. So I think we have to wrestle with the passages of Scripture that don't fit perfectly into the story. And I'm wondering how we do that.
Sure. I'm going to repeat the question for the recording purposes. And the summary, rather ask, how do we deal with the passages in the Old Testament that don't seem to not fit with loving the immigrant, but actually call to kill immigrants, to eradicate people's groups that are unfaithful to God, and how we kind of like make an explanation for that. That's an awesome question. I deal with that question a lot. For a long, long time, I hated the story of the flood because I didn't know how to deal with that fact that God eradicated a lot of people just because they were wicked. And I think that's what we need to go back to. They were wicked. The laws that deal with intermarrying and people and sojourners needing to be circumcised, it was not a matter of citizenship, it's a matter of allegiance to Yahweh. It's a matter of, because the people of Israel and every Christian is so prone to go away of following God, God is calling his people to keep the devotion to God. And a way for a sojourner to become part of the people of God was to be submitted to the worship of God, to love God, to actually believe in God. And we have stories like Ruth, where she was a complete foreigner, but she fully embraced God to the point that she followed Naomi to a land that was foreign for her because she believed in God so much. She never had any questions or problems. She never married a really good Jew guy. Because she got why? Because she was submitted to God. So these laws that deal with, we have to make sure we protect, are not talking about national security threats. They're talking about protecting the integrity of our worship to God. And that's where it's very different. I imagine this in like God's constitution. It's like the intermarriage laws and those are not in the category of citizenship. They're in the category of holiness, where the one of love the immigrant as yourself, welcome them, let them be part of your people, are in the category of compassion and mercy and God's love. And our policies for the most vulnerable. So most vulnerable and compassion, holiness. They're completely different. They're not talking about the conversations some churches try to justify on national security threats and citizenship. That is modern, this time concern being read back to the Old Testament. So.
Can you repeat John 3:16, please?
John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his son.
Last one. Let me tell you, the devil is a liar. It doesn't matter if it's in the church, white church, black church, blue church, they're telling lies.
Yeah.
I want to say,
We have time for one quick question, but
I want
yes.
to say two things real quick. It happens most often with whites because that's the dominant culture, obviously. But my family has worked in the Dominican Republic where it's darker skin tones. Those are the people in power. And so we're going to see those in a lot of different ways throughout the world. And it's our job to attack those and spread God's word and provide clarity. Also, I hear that 1,000 times a day. I think it's really important that we need to view the Bible holistically as a whole work. And so what happens when we want to find the little parts we like or find the parts that fit our policy, we can do that and camp on that little hill and be wrong. if we don't view the full work of the gospel, the whole story of the Bible.
Good.
So I think
Yeah.
that's real important.
Thank you.
It's
Yeah,
an
that's
RC.
good, that's open.
You're claiming credit?
I do appreciate the question though. I'm gonna give another shout out for that because I know that's the type of questions we deal with. You know, that's not the pleasing question to ask. But it is the question that we ask when we go back home.
We have one more question.
Yes.
And then we gotta shut it down because we have childcare upstairs.
Yes, and Herbert has his hand up from the very good quote.
He's also an RC.
Yes. Go for it.
So when I've talked to immigrants or immigrant families, they usually, they tell me their story and then, they tell me that, after their journey they get here and I'm in regards to illegal immigrants who overstay their visas or whatever reason. They always tell me, yeah, but God has us here for a reason. I feel like He hasn't taken us out of this country because He's got a plan for us and there's purpose for our staying here. But then how do you go about explaining that to somebody who doesn't understand when they're like, well, God doesn't bless somebody who breaks the law. You know what I mean? This family didn't abide by the laws of our country. So how can He bless them? They're just staying here because they're hiding. So how do you go about explaining to somebody who doesn't understand God's purpose, whether they break the laws of the land or not?
Yeah. Yes, I think depends on the person. There's people who will never want to hear anything different than what they believe. And honestly, to those, I don't talk to. I can send you what I read in the Bible, and you can read it. And because what we're going to do if we talk to somebody who is very set in their own ways is that we're going to end up in the same problem that the world has. We're going to be arguing and fighting and dividing and going apart. But when a person is actually willing to lean in the tension and kind of like, well, I don't know what's going on, like I feel like this is wrong, but I don't know how to deal with it, meaning like I know that people violated a law, but how do I understand where they're at now? I think it's not a simple answer, but the simplest answer is to really listen. Look at why that person, what happened in that person's life. Because usually people don't come here wanting to be illegal, wanting to be undocumented, wanting to stay in the margins forever. Nobody wants that. Something happens in the process. And that's where the next section will be really helpful to talk about economics. We're going to really see how money drives a lot of the policy that we see in this country. And some policies and some reasons why people become undocumented, become illegal, go back to a flaw in our immigration system that everybody knows it needs a reform, but nobody knows how to reform it. So that's a different question now. As far as the Bible, you can always look deep into the tension on when to violate the law of the land. Because let me tell you, when Daniel was sent to the lion's den, was because he violated the law of the land. He didn't kneel down to worship the king. Was that wrong? He was in allegiance to God, that he didn't kneel to Nebuchadnezzar, and he was sent to sleep with the lions. He violated the law of the land for a purpose. So kind of like there is a tension in the scripture where sometimes the land of the law of the land is not right always, and there's moments in which violating the law of the land are justified in God's eyes, and sometimes where it's not. And it's not as simple as saying when you do A, B, and C, and when you have these requirements, you're good. You can violate the law. There's tension, and we need to lean into that tension. What does it look like? And let the Holy Spirit speak. He is here. He is active. He moves. He wants us to lean and deal with these issues and reveal things. So, but many times we want to make it quick, and we don't want the Holy Spirit to speak to us. We have to let Him speak to us. What does this look like? I think Jeremy's waving like really crazy. We have to finish it up.
Put your hands together for Antonio.
So
have hard questions, we'll have someone else know. I'm going to be pulling Angelica. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you so much. Just so appreciative of the demeanor, the passion, the understanding. So it is possible to talk about immigration and not fight. We can talk about matters of tension and maybe even disagree and still love each other. Right? Isn't that pretty cool? This is why the church needs to be at the forefront of these discussions. To say, okay, what does God have to say here? And I love what you did, Angelica. These are hard questions. These are great questions the four of you asked. I mean, these are on-point questions. And I just love how I said, okay, let's start here and then go from there. And that's just what we don't see happening in our culture so often. And the better we could be equipped with that, man, what a force the church could be in the midst of this. And so family, I'm so thankful that you all understood the need to be here today. This was gold what you received today. And we're trusting God for more of that the next 2 weeks. We believe He's going to do mighty things. For those who aren't here, get them here. Okay, bring them here. Tell them, hey, you got to come through, and encourage them. And for all of us, let's keep searching the scriptures. And now let it be that when we get on the news, doesn't matter which news network you're on, say, okay, what's the assumptions? What are the presuppositions at work here? And let's begin to discern those things. Say, God, how do I approach that? Stellar job. Thank you so much, Angelica. Let's give our hands together one more time. And then you guys can please get the kids. Then we keep talking. Father in heaven, we bless your name. We praise you, oh God, that as we've said before, the Bible is as relevant as tomorrow's newspaper and as sure as tomorrow's sunrise. And God, isn't it wild in 2019 talking about immigration in the United States, your word has something to say. Thank you for that, God. Thank you for not leaving us blind, God. Your word indeed is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. God, may we hold it tight and continue to venture forward in these dark days. In Jesus' name, amen.